Hey, what's up, everyone? Hope you've been having some great conversation in your groups about James chapter 3. I hope you've been enjoying personally studying through the book of James, and you've been bringing some really great notes to conversation and only enhance our discussion together. And I wanted to take just the next few moments to share some of my thoughts and share some of my notes as I've been studying through the book of James alongside with you. It's very clear that we can see here in James chapter 3 that he's speaking about something very specific. He's primarily talking about the power of the tongue and how there is great life and there is great death in the tongue, our words, our language, our speech. And probably every single one of us have experienced that great power at some point in our lives, and we've probably imposed that power for good or for bad on other people, right? You probably have memories that flood back to your mind, whether the great positive things or great negative things that have been spoken about us or straight to us. And many of those aren't really good, positive memories. Probably many of them are like, hey, somebody said something that was deeply hurtful and deeply impactful, and it's stuck in my memory bank for all time. Now, I can still remember the words of my high school football coach, word for word, as he berated me on the football field in my junior year of high school. I just remember these words, something I never really wanted to hold on to, but for all of my adult life so far, word for word, I remember the things he said to me that day on the field. We've all been victims, for good or for bad, of the power of the tongue, the life and death that lies in the tongue. It's interesting, a few years back, researchers did a study about the power of words, and they actually did it using plants, not just like, hey, like our psyche kind of wrestles with words in a certain way, but they actually took two different plants, same kind of plant, same measure of growth, and they put them in two separate rooms, and they gave them the same water, sunlight, food, every kind of nourishment they physically needed to thrive and do well. But the only difference they did is they had people who would walk through these two rooms, and to one plant they would speak words of life over, right? They'd speak positive things, joyful things, nice things. This feels really stupid, right? But it's very interesting. They spoke really nice things to this plant over here, but in the other room, every time they walked through the room, they would say negative, defeating things, rude, awful things toward the plant. And with the same systems of nurturing physically of each of these plants, the plant that had good words, kind words spoken over it thrived, while the one who was spoken negative words to withered and died. That is shocking and bizarre. I don't know if you think that, but I think that. That shows us very simply, even on plants themselves, how powerful words have inherently, innately. And James is talking about how important that is for us as Jesus followers to be people who tame the tongue, to be people who speak life rather than death. See, as Jesus followers, we are agents of Jesus. This is what James would say. And as agents of Jesus, we're meant to bring the kingdom of love and life into the world. And with that in mind, maybe the simple question is like, what do we do with this tongue that seems so untamable, right? And we could come up with like harsh solutions, or like maybe I'll just like never speak again, right? It seems like there's too much power here. But what's true is that you don't solve the problem of an unruly horse by keeping it in the barn, or the problem of a hard-to-steer ship by keeping it tied to the dock. These images that James is using to talk about, we put bits in horses' mouths. We use a rudder to steer ships. You don't just like tie those things down and don't let them out. That's not the solution here when it relates to the tongue either. But James uses these words. He says, for every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea, is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. At the very beginning of the chapter, he says, if anyone does not stumble in his word, he is a perfect man. What he's saying here is that like, none of you are perfect, so you've all screwed up in your language and the words that you've used. You've spoken death to people who needed life from you. And so it puts us in this strange place. Maybe if we read these words of James, we go like, well, what are we supposed to do here when he communicates that nobody can tame the tongue? No person in their own power can keep full control over our language, over our words, and the power that they contain. But what James is communicating is that the Holy Spirit is able to help us tame our tongues. Through submission and practice, the Holy Spirit can help us. I just want to take a couple more minutes and let's talk about three simple practices that will help us to submit ourselves to the Holy Spirit so that he can help us to tame our tongues so that we be people who speak life over people rather than death. 3 practices to submit us to the Holy Spirit. And the first is very simple. This is taking on a posture, right? As we submit to the Holy Spirit, it's taking on a posture where he can do his work, where we open ourselves to him. These are practices that help us do that so the Holy Spirit can work within us. And the first practice is this. It's very simple. Talk less, listen more. Talk less, and I'm inspired to say smile more for all my Hamilton fans out there. Maybe, no, talk less and listen more. What's true is that we live in a culture where everyone has to share all of their opinions, right? You ever felt inundated with everybody's opinion, especially on the internet? And not every opinion's bad, right? Like this is kind of beautiful in a little way. There's so much free expression available, creative expression available in the world. Like this isn't necessarily on its own a bad thing. But here's the problem. There isn't a lot of accountability about what is good teaching and what isn't. And James says at the beginning of the chapter, he said, let's not have a bunch of you become teachers. In our culture, it kind of seems like it's like, hey, let everyone be an official voice on a certain topic, right? Or on every topic. And here's what's true about it in our culture. Christians haven't always helped in this area very much, right? I think often the church has been known in recent history as people who share their opinions more than they are people who are an open ear to listen. They're a shoulder to cry on. We, maybe more than others, have a lot of things to say about just about everything. So what would happen if we simply took a seat of humility? What would happen is if we took on the words, I don't know, more often. The phrase, I don't know, is a freeing statement. It's also a relational statement that'll help us build bridges to people who might see differently from us. I don't know could be a freeing statement if the church was willing to say it a little bit more often. Or even if we don't go, hey, it's not that I don't know, but maybe there's some things that maybe it's better that I don't say everything that's in my mind. Imagine that beauty if I just withheld my words sometimes because they may not help here. What if we talked less and listened more? We shoot back to James chapter 1. He starts off with this instruction. Now everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. As we work to allow the Holy Spirit to tame our tongues, the practice of holding our words more often is an extremely valuable one. That's the first practice that helps us submit to the Holy Spirit here. That is to talk less and to listen more. And the second is this: control your thought diet. I don't know if you've often thought about your thoughts as needing a diet sometimes. Because I think often we don't have any control over what enters our minds and what processes in there, what stays around and swirls and forms our worldview. But what's so valuable if we want to tame our tongues, to be mindful of what our thought diet is. What's coming in? What am I consuming that's altering and changing how I see the world? Jesus said these words. He said, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. That is to say, like, the content of my heart is really important because whatever the content of my heart is, that's exactly what's going to come out of me, right? Jesus also said these words. He said, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. If there's something that's bringing you to sin or destruction, get rid of that thing. Deal with that thing. In the same way, our thought life dictates our speech. And so maybe if we use the logic and the teaching of Jesus, we really got to figure out how to cut off destructive thoughts that form our minds around destructive ideas. How do we do this? The mind, it's important for us to recognize the mind shapes the heart and the heart shapes the tongue. Our thoughts that stir around in our minds shapes how we see the world, how we approach the world with our hearts, the deepest part of ourselves, and then our words simply follow after that. If I allow destructive thoughts, either about others or even about myself, it's only a matter of time until those thoughts and feelings start coming out in actions and words. And beyond even the expression there, if I allow these thoughts to just tear me up inside or tear away at someone else, that'll eat away at our souls in time. That destroys us from the inside out. And so we got to be mindful of what our thought diet is at every turn. I can remember as a kid watching my dad He'd be sitting at the dinner table or something, and then he'd hear like a buzzing sound. He'd hear like a fly just flying around somewhere. And I'd watch him just slow down and just be very, very still before striking out and like smashing a fly on the dining room table. Wonderful things to do around dinner sometime. But I can remember that approach was just so cautious but aware. What if we approached our thoughts in the same way? That we were almost just waiting. We're like, oh, the thought enters my mind, and I'm just sitting there for a moment before I snatch it out of the sky and submit it to Jesus. What if we were so aware of our thought diet in that way that no matter what enters my mind, I process it, I take it captive, and then I deal with it accordingly? If we want to be able to control our tongues, I think a big practice that will help us submit to the Holy Spirit and allow Him to do that is to control our thought diet. To give no quarter to thoughts that bring destruction on yourself or on other people. Control your thought diet is number 2. And number 3, it's very simple. Commit yourself to wisdom, as James would say. Commit yourself to wisdom. In a culture full of open information and rampant opinions and relativism, there is little wisdom. Here's what James says in verse 17 of chapter 3. He says, "The wisdom from above is first pure, then peace-loving, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial, and free of hypocrisy." As we commit ourselves to wisdom, it simply means spending time at Jesus' feet. He has all the wisdom we need. Spend time at Jesus' feet. Commit yourself to His wisdom. It means submitting your will and your way of life to Him. It means letting His teaching and His love fill our minds that will direct and control our thought life. And it means committing our language, our tongue, as a tool to be used for the kingdom. As Paul reminds us in 1 Thessalonians, we are not children of the night or of the darkness. We are children of the light, children of the day. As we submit to the Holy Spirit, let that be seen in every word we speak.